Well, first of all, thank you, Literal Publishing, for doing this interview. How it came about was that as a reporter for many years for Houston PBS, I noticed that nobody was doing anything on sex trafficking, and I knew that Houston was a hub. And I thought it was very strange that no one had ever really done a documentary, as far as I knew. And I thought it was a problem. And so when I lost my job, I decided that I wanted to do something. And one of my best friends who I had worked with for many years, we had worked together on productions. We were in California, and I said, listen, do you want to do this? There's no money. I said, but I'll put up the money to do this because I feel that it's important that we do it. And we had a team of people that were friends of ours that were also interested in the topic and were willing to work for free as long as we could do a good job on the documentary. And I knew we could because I had worked with Ron Cabley, who was a 30-something award-winning Emmy editor and producer. Gina is also an Emmy award-winning, had done movies. And all the friends that I've had over the years who are people who care about social issues. So we decided then and there, let's do it. Let's see what happens. Originally, we were supposed to do 5 minutes, but then life took over, and there we go. We did a documentary. Well, first of all, we first had a meeting with the head of the sex trafficking unit for the city of Houston. And even though she didn't want to be interviewed, she gave us names, and we started with those names of people who had gotten out of the sex trafficking situation, which is really hard. Only 1% of people who are sex trafficked actually can get out, which is really a sad statistic. But that's how we found our people. And as we met these people and learned so much more about what was happening from the people who had actually lived it, who had survived it, who had tried to get out and done something about it. Because all these people that we interviewed, actually, most of them are trying to do something to fix the problem. And I thought that that's how we found people. And then once we stopped shooting, at one point, I realized that if we could get a former pimp, someone who had actually trafficked people, to find out what mindset would allow somebody to do something like that. And so we found Mr. Cap, who is now a rapper, and he realized that what he was doing was wrong, and now he speaks against sex trafficking. So we wanted people who had suffered through this horrible situation, but also who were doing something about it, and who could tell us how to fix it. Gaining their trust is, I think people know me from my background that I'm not into got you or I don't have an agenda. I wanted to get the truth out, and the truth comes from people who actually lived it, and the law enforcement who actually are doing something about it. So we knew that there's one of the people that we interviewed who had been a sex trafficked was now working in jails. And the reason she was working in jails to rehabilitate people who had been trafficked was Adrian Garcia. He was a former policeman and police chief, I think, and he was the first one to think, we got to bring somebody in who understands this issue and see if we can lower the recidivism rate. Because a lot of these women, what do you do if you've never been educated, you've been trafficked for years, you go to jail, when you get out, what do you do if you're not trained? So this program helps women and men who can get back to a normal life. And so that's how we pick the law enforcement. Obviously, the FBI works really hard on trafficking, and they do have a unit here in Houston that's working against trafficking. And I don't know if I shared why we decided to do this, not only because I thought it was a problem, but because of COVID, the COVID pandemic. they were getting way more children online than before. So the trade had gone way up during COVID. And I thought, people don't know this. Now, unfortunately, most of the kids they're getting are foster care kids. I think 60% of the kids being trafficked are in the foster care system. And may I say that the foster care system in Texas is one of the worst in the country. What surprised me is that everybody's been very nonchalant, and I include myself, about prostitution. It was like, well, it's the oldest profession, that's just always existed, it's okay, that's the way it is, and men need it, and women enjoy it, and all these myths about prostitution. And when I was younger, I'd see a prostitute, oh, well, she's a prostitute. Never thinking about why. The question is, why is she or he a prostitute? And people don't ever ask these questions, especially the men who buy sex, who, by the way, are men who make a lot of money. I think the average is $120,000 a year. They're highly educated, they're college educated, but they have no idea the kind of pain that they're imposing by paying for sex. And again, I want to make it clear that I don't have a problem with women who want to have sex for money. There's a difference between being a sex worker and a trafficked victim. Because if you are actually paying somebody to have sex, a pimp or whatever, then that means that you're not doing this on your own. If you get paid to have sex and you're the only one that's responsible for that, I don't have a problem with that. But this is different. And so for me, learning that we need to be more conscious about what's really going on. And we need to ask the question, every time you see somebody in the street who's being trafficked, you need to ask yourself the question, how did they end up here? Why? Do they really enjoy this? No, they don't. Think about it. If you have sex 10 times a day, that's why they get on drugs. Not only are they being drugged by the pimp, but they're also drugging themselves because they can't deal with the pain of having to do this as a job that's being forced on them. Well, that's a great question, because I even thought, oh, they're bringing, immigrants. Right now, that's a big topic, right? Immigration, illegal immigration. Well, most of these people are Americans, trafficking Americans who are here. And I think that what we need to really be aware of, they're getting our children. And once you get a child, you cannot be a prostitute if you're a child, by the way. That's just not, you cannot use the word prostitute and a 13-year-old child, because a child cannot make those kinds of decisions. So I think that was a big problem for me, to know that they're getting kids and it's not getting better. And it is happening here in Houston, where, as you'll notice in the documentary, there are more brothels and Starbucks in Houston, and they're close to schools, and they're close to churches, and and it's insane that this is happening. And why is it happening in Houston? It's because Houston is very pro-business. So they close down a brothel and they open it the next day. And so there's no real, guardrails to keep these people from opening and continuing that industry, which is one of the most profitable industries that we have in the United States. First drugs, then guns, and then trafficking. PBS, usually people who watch PBS, they care about issues. They're more informed, and they're the ones that make decisions, right? Or they're the ones that vote. And I think, if anything, what we hope, my whole team, because this was definitely a team project, what we hope is that people will become more conscious of what the problem is. and start doing things about it. I know Texas has a law where healthcare workers have to take a course on sex trafficking. That's fine, but the bottom line is, why are we putting the prostitutes in jail or the traffic victims in jail, and we're not putting the people who buy the sex? You know, to me, you've got to figure, and that's one thing we didn't get to because we couldn't fit everybody in, but there are organizations working with men and women who buy sex so they can curtail the demand for sex. So I think that we need to go there. We need to start figuring out how to deal with it. But mainly another thing is online trafficking. I mean, we need to do something about that because we need to protect our kids. And, you know, there's so much. The problem right now is that I don't think there's consciousness about sex trafficking. It's happening everywhere, but you know, it's not affecting me, therefore why should I care? Well, we need to care because they're getting our kids mostly. To me, it's awareness and creating consciousness around the issue. Like I said, I mean, here I am, a reporter, and for many years, I saw prostitutes say, well, that's the way it is, you know, it exists, it's okay. I mean, men need it. You know, I had my own myths about trafficking. But then you start talking to these people and you realize how painful that is, how horrible it is, and how it keeps growing, and we don't seem to be doing it much about it. Again, we talk a lot about these things, but we don't. You need to create laws that hold people accountable, and that's not happening. We're holding the prostitutes accountable. We're not holding the people who are prostituting them or who are, you know, exploiting them. So there's got to be a better. I think once you start with consciousness, and I think films and movies and, you know, those are things that raise consciousness, and they're necessary. And then you need to change the laws because they're not helping. They're making things worse. So. I always said this as a reporter, that when something happens, you need to ask why. And we don't do that. We just cover it and we don't say, why did this happen? Like, why do we have hurricanes now that are killing more people or destroying more homes? Why does someone vote for a certain person? Why are they getting our children? What's happening? And I think, if anything, I think that was a wake-up call. I mean, I've always been kind of that way, you know, where I'm asking why, but now it's like any issue whatsoever. Like, why are there terrorist attacks? Why are there wars? Why do politicians do certain things? So I think that in that sense, I became way more aware of asking that question and making sure that before I do any type of research, I'll find out why. And from different points of view, because you don't want to just listen to one side, you know? So. The project is already being streamed on PBS, so you can go to pbs.org, and we'll leave the link. You'll leave the link on there, and also, so in other words, you can watch it anytime you want. But if you want to watch it on TV, like Channel 8 will air it. Channel 8 Houston PBS will air it in January, which I think is Sex Trafficking Month. But you know, depending on where you live, you can call your station or find out what the PBS schedule is, or again, you can watch it online anytime on pbs.org. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
No, thank you, Literal, for supporting you know, information on this topic.